Check. Wow, it's kind of scary. It actually seems to have some kind of power over us. That when our opponent puts us in check, we're worried that if we leave the check on the board for too long, it's going to be detrimental to us. It's going to hurt us. So we have to quickly find a way to get out of it. But it's actually quite the opposite. When your opponent puts you in check, this is a time when you should really think things over. It's a critical time in a game. You have those three options: capture, block, or run. But sometimes you'll be surprised at what the actual answer is. Let's have a look. I was playing this game back in 1996, and I came up with what I thought was a pretty clever plan. Check. He took it. That one was easy. Check. Okay, pretty easy as well. Now he thought I was going to take his bishop, but no, another check. He blocks it with the bishop. Okay. I capture here, threatening mate and his queen, so he has to take. Check. Check. He runs over here, and now he simply puts his rook up to get ready for my next check. And what would you do now? Move the king or block with a rook? Well, he blocked with a rook, and I won. Oh boy, did I let out a sigh of relief. Check. His rook's pinned. He can't take me. Check and checkmate. If he had just taken 10 seconds, he would have seen that, and he probably would have won the game. Now, back in 1895, Emanuel Lasker beat Harry Nelson Pillsbury, but not before Pillsbury taught us a little something about escaping check. Lasker's black and he plays queen to b6 check. We can quickly see that going to the c-file, not a good idea because Lasker's rook comes over with this check, and once the rook's involved, then it's an easy victory for black. If we play king to a1, well, this is a little tougher to find, but after the bishop takes, supported by the queen, the only move is rook captures, queen takes, and then some clever checks by black will push the king into a position where he's going to either get mated or you'll have to give away everything that you own. So, in the game, after this check, Pillsbury actually blocks with the bishop, even though it's not guarded. And the idea is it brings the queen off of that critical diagonal where she was supporting d4. And after this clever move, Pillsbury got to a drawn position before he missed it and actually went on to lose the game. But we still learned from that important idea of escaping check. Now, the great Levon Aronian playing white here against Vishy Anand surprised everybody when after this check, instead of doing one of the two obvious moves of king to g2 or king to h1, he plays king f1, walking right into a fork. And now he has to pick his next move carefully. He plays king e1, and the rook is gone, but now his a-pawn is off and running. Notice if he had played on the previous move, if he had played king to e2, which looks more natural, getting closer to the center, after the knight captures here and the pawn pushes, the knight can play knight c3 check, buying a tempo for himself to get back just in time to slow down that a-pawn. But the king went over to e1, and Aronian went on to win the game with some beautiful moves at the end, and eventually trapping Anand's knight. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples here. Here, white quickly decides that c1 is a safe square, and of course, wrong. That's checkmate. The knight and the bishop are both pinned. Here, the black knight's checking the king and attacking the rook. Well, you don't want to lose your rook. Here's an obvious answer, just take it. Wrong again. Discovered check and checkmate. The simple move, of course, was just move your king over. Lose your rook, it's okay. In this one, we can use process of elimination. If you move your king down to the first rank, no good. The black rook comes down and you're going to lose. If we move our king to h3, there's a fork by the knight at f4. If we move our king and capture the pawn, the knight can fork at e5. And if the queen takes the pawn, there's a fork at h4. So by process of elimination, hopefully you can pretty quickly find king to g3. Now in this one, you have to choose. It's going to be painful no matter what you do, but to get out of this, you have 3 different ways to block it. Try not to give your queen away. And of course, playing rook f2 allows a fork, and you're actually going to lose pretty quickly. So here, rook e3. It doesn't look pretty, but it's the best move. Now sometimes we're avoiding check and trying not to walk into a perpetual check. White's winning this game, about to get a checkmate, and black has played a check against white, and if white chooses the wrong square, it's going to be a draw. For example, king f2, check, 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 check. Also, if the king had gone to h2, there's this simple perpetual pattern back and forth like that. And so the answer here is king h3. And there's no safe checks. Even though it's the king move that's the closest to the black queen, it's also the safest. So you always have to look at all of your possible options. Here we have the black king stalemated, and white has to make sure not to capture that pawn. But also don't block it, so you can't play king c2. And even king b1 fails because check. After the king moves, promote, take, stalemate. So the only move that wins is king to c1, and now the pawn still has a move, and you can unstalemate their king and win the game easily. And we'll end up with this one, which is inspired by a position from many, many years ago, the Saavedra position. Leberkin composed this one in 1931. This is a partial composition. This is the end of his composition. And after white pushes, then the rook plays this check. And if the king moves to the c file, then it's a fork, winning the pawn, right? And so instead, maybe the king goes over to the e file. But now check, and the rook goes back and stops the pawn. So what do? It looks like there's nothing else to do. Well, always look at all of your options. And boom, knight d3. Rook captures. The king guards the c file. But there's one more little step. This is kind of cute. I have to show it to you. If you get a queen, check. Ouch. Stalemate. So you actually under-promote to a rook, threatening mate on the a file. They guard that, and now two threats at once. The king attacks the rook, and the white rook threatens to come down to c1, and it's all over. And so is our lesson. And I'll check you later. But don't panic. Take your time.